Last time we looked at the beginning of a new decade for Weekly Shonen Jump, and today we'll continue to delve deeper into the 80s by tackling 1981. Dr.Slump would continue to be especially popular, getting many early covers this year, but this year would also see numerous big hits for the magazine, as well as some shorter titles, so without further ado, let's dive into our first manga of 1981. Starting in issue 6, we got Hinomaru Gekijo by Hisashi Eguchi, who found success with his prior work Susume Pirates, a baseball-themed comedy series. This time he'd be writing a detective comedy series though, that sadly only lasted 2 volumes and 24 chapters. The plot would see the detective agency being taken over by an elementary schooler named Sushimaru after he got out of Abashiri Children's Prison, and from then on the protagonist would shift to him and the Suzuki family. Likely it focused on absurdist gags like having Tsuchimaru smoke even though he's only 8, and having a prison for elementary schoolers. There was a lot of referential humour too, and it even referenced things like Gundam, as well as Eguchi's previous work, Susume Pirates. It wouldn't last long though, but this wouldn't be the last we'd see of Eguchi in 1981. Forever Shinji-Kun or Forever Kamiko-kun is next, which is another baseball series only lasting 3 volumes and 30 chapters. It was written by Katsuyuki Edamatsu. In the story, a scientist creates a helmet called the Paramet, which has the ability to convert mental fortitude or suffering into physical strength. The protagonist, Kamiko, gets to use the helmet to play baseball. Other devices also show up throughout the story, such as the Paraball as well, which is some kind of special baseball. And while there is a big focus on the baseball aspects, a large portion of the story seems to be focused on inspiring a young girl called Yoko who can't walk to walk again. It seems to mix baseball and the classic shonen message of never giving up, and then it applies that to disabled people, which I think is really sweet. And others seem to think so too, as it's often described as a very gentle story that's fondly remembered even today in some Japanese circles, at least from the reviews I could find. The artwork is really cute as well, and I love the covers. Sadly, I don't have much else to say about this manga, probably because it's quite short. Following this, we have Captain Subasa by Yoichi Takahashi, which is one of the big names of Jump's 80s, and a football manga you've likely heard of. It ran for a total of 37 volumes and 363 chapters, being present for the entirety of the 80s decade and becoming one of Jump's biggest sports titles ever, and has still been ongoing in some form, where up until recently we got an announcement that Takahashi is finally retiring. Subasa begins as a young boy with dreams of winning the FIFA World Cup for Japan, and he starts that by joining the Nankatsu football team. There he hones his skills, meets new teammates, and mostly shows off how ridiculously good he is at the sport. Early on, he also gets mentored by a Brazilian footballer named Roberto Hongo, who wants to take him to Brazil to train him even more, which he'll do once he wins the Under-17 World Championships for Japan. From what I read, it's a pretty run-of-the-mill football shonen series, although the art is really unique, and there's clearly a lot of passion on display towards football. It's evident because a lot of people from all over the world have come to love Captain Subasa, it being particularly well loved in South America. It's had translations in numerous languages too, like Italian, French, German, and more, but none in English, and perhaps because there's a lack of an official English translation, that Captain Subasa hasn't received the mass popularity it has in other countries. Since most of the people I talk about who are in the UK or US who don't speak Spanish or a different language don't have much of a familiarity with the manga, which is a shame because it's an incredibly influential one. It's also one you can read in many different languages, Spanish being the biggest one because it's available on Manga Plus. Hopefully one day they do an official English translation though. It's a work that, from my understanding, popularized football a ton in Japan. and it went on to inspire many real-world footballers, and not just Japanese ones, but ones from other countries, with the Captain Subasa wiki having an entire page dedicated to footballers the manga has inspired, with names such as Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo on there, and even with just a passing familiarity with the sport, I understand how big those two names are, which is very impressive. The first manga alone isn't responsible for all the popularity and influence, however, as it's had a number of spin-offs, continuations such as the current Captain Subasa Rising Sun. It's also had tons of anime series, OVAs, video games, and more, many of which are very recent. Captain Subasa has remained popular and influential from its inception. It also likely helped popularize sports shonen ideas and tropes seen in previous works from Jump and other magazines, cultivating the idea that sports had an essential place in shonen magazines at the time. Captain Subasa would also be responsible for bringing in more female readers to the magazine, possibly due to its art style being cute and the content being a bit more appealing for younger girls, but there would also be a blossoming community of BL and yaoi enthusiasts who clung onto Subasa, making and publishing doujinshi about its characters. Otaku Champloo has a small blog post about the history of Fujoshis and BL in Jump, where they mention Subasa somewhat, and they mention that the first ever published doujinshi was a Captain Subasa one. I'm not sure if that's true, but I find it interesting, and I'll leave a link to their blog in the description. This wouldn't be the last of Captain Subasa we would see in Shonen Jump, as 1994 would see a continuation of the series within the magazine, the Captain Subasa World Youth arc. But it'll be a while until we get to 1994, so hopefully I've talked about Captain Subasa enough for now, but if you are interested, it does have a full fan translation in English and, as mentioned, tons of official translations in other languages. We would then see another baseball series begin with Fine Play by Masato Yamaguchi and Takeshi Fujimori. It would only last a single volume, however, and despite the magazine having 3 baseball series at once, at one point during 1981, with all of them on a cover together, none of them would last long, the sport wavering in popularity at the time perhaps. Other manga weren't doing great either, with the fantasy manga Makenchi by Motoki Monma and Sachio Umemoto only lasting 2 volumes. Rock and Roll Monogatari, Icarus Kobushi, Guts Try, and Super Police would also all end at around 10 chapters long, and I don't think any of them even got a volume release. Jump was still pretty ruthless at its time with its axes. They wanted to really focus on the big hits, it seemed, or maybe there was just a big market for shorter series or something, but I sincerely doubt it. Satoshi Ikuzawa would return in 1981 with Kaido Racer Go. However, unlike his prior racing success with Circuit no Okami, Kaido Racer would only last 3 volumes and 23 chapters. It followed Go Akutegawa, a biker and street racer known as the Blue Shooting Star. It likely focused on racing aspects as well as some ecchi or romantic elements which were present in Ikuzawa's previous works. Go would find himself not only racing other bikes but also supercars, notably another racer called Satan's Wolf, which would beat Go with him vowing to get revenge in the Okutama Grand Prix, serving as the manga's conclusion. George Akiyama was a name present throughout Jump's earlier years and in the 70s. Shaka no Muso would be his first manga of the 80s though, with him having had quite the gap of time between his last serialization for Jump. Shaka no Muso would only last 2 volumes and 19 chapters and would follow Shaka's son, a boy who wanders into a small village who has a suspicious amount of money on him, and odd events seem to follow him around, like him scattering 5 million yen into the middle of town for no reason on one occasion. From my understanding, it sounds almost like a mystery horror series, like something Shuzo Oshimi might write, having this odd character in Shaka's son do all these weird things which keep the people of the village second guessing about their motivations. The story seemed to ramp up near to its cancellation, with Shaka's son's motives being revealed, him wanting to build an underground fortress beneath the village to house nuclear weapons to possibly rule the world with, but then he's just abducted by a UFO at the end. It sounds crazy and is kind of expected from George Akiyama, and the rushed ending definitely doesn't make it easy to figure out what exactly happened, but it sounds like a really unique manga and one I'd love to read if it ever got translated. Galga Rival by Keizo Maekawa lasted 4 volumes and 37 chapters and was an ecchi comedy manga focused on Shinosuke Yaoi, a student who falls in love with the school's best student, Ai Akamatsu. He's told if he can pass a big school test, then she will go out with him, and I guess wacky rom-com antics ensue based on the premise. It sounds like more girls got involved throughout the story as it progressed, and it seems to be your standard ecchi rom-com, with many manga like this helping to characterize Jump differently at this time and being quite predominant. Our next manga is Our Zora Fishing by Yoshihiro Takahashi and Hiroichi Fusei, lasting 42 chapters and 5 volumes. As you can probably guess, this is a fishing manga. It follows a 5th grader called Masaru Hayase who moved from the city to the countryside where he falls in love with fishing, due to him living next to a stream. Masaru ends up getting new fishing gear, meeting new friends, and I assume it mixes educational content surrounding different fish and the process of fishing with shonen sports elements, though it sounds quite relaxed from what I can tell and likely a chill time. Kosen No Wolf by Ryoji Ryozaki was a short 1-volume baseball story that spanned 4 chapters, following Hiroshi Higurashi, the captain of the Koka High School baseball team who dreams of going to the Kosen. Unlike a lot of other baseball series though, it seemed Kosen No Wolf took a bit of a cynical look at the baseball world of the early 80s, critiquing it, particularly the gambling angle and how it's being used by adults for their entertainment and profit, rather than purely for the sake of baseball. It seems that near the end of the manga, Ryoji gets to go to the Kosen and decides to just piss everywhere. Perhaps as some kind of critique or disruption, whether that's to actually address some problem with the baseball industry at the time or just to highlight that Ryoji's a bit of a troublemaker, I'm not sure. Also, his girlfriend, I assume, since he kisses her, has a really sick design and some really cool short hair. You really don't see characters with short hair like this much, so that really stood out to me. Cat's Eye would be Tsukasa Hojo's debut in Jump, going on to run for a total of 18 volumes and 157 chapters. Like his most well-known work, City Hunter, Cat's Eye would tackle crime and interweave romantic elements, but would focus on the thief side of things, with the main characters being a trio of 3 sisters that form the group Cat's Eye, who also coincidentally run a coffee shop with the same name as well. Hitomi, the middle sister, is predominantly the main character and gets the most focus, alongside her boyfriend Toshio Itsumi, a police officer who's in charge of trying to catch the Cat's Eye. A lot of the comedy and the general premise hangs on the idea that the two of them are rivals, a thief and a police officer, despite Toshio not knowing for the majority of the series that his girlfriend is a master thief. It's cute and silly, and you get a lot of episodic chapters about all the different heists, and it's cool to see how the sisters steal different things and make fools out of the police force. The romance elements are pretty good too, with a couple of bad outdated chapters here and there, but I'm quite impressed that it's focused on adult women for the most part and treats them quite respectfully, I think. I find it really interesting that a manga so predominantly focused on female thieves did so well in Jump, and it definitely adds to the feminine presence Jump had in the early 80s. As the manga went on, more story was added as well, it being revealed that the cats are specifically stealing paintings from their missing father. This becomes the main plot that's revisited from time to time. Other shorter arcs exist too. Some are comedy focused and act as more a change of pace, like the time the group go to a ski resort on vacation, or there's also a whole casino arc near the end of the manga. Cat's Eye is also fully translated and you can read it all, and it's not bad. It has some good art and there's some nice laughs to be had, although it does get a bit repetitive. from time to time, and the ending is a little bit disappointing due to it having this really inconsequential and sudden dramatic twist that really doesn't matter, but it doesn't really ruin the manga either. Cat's Eye would also get an anime adaptation with 2 seasons totaling 73 episodes, a spin-off movie featuring Lupin III, a live-action film from 1997, and a French live-action drama series is currently being produced. And there is also a reimagining of the entire manga that's 8 volumes long by Asai Shingo and Sakurai Nakameguro. Cat's Eye left quite the legacy behind it, and it remains popular to this day, in part because of Tsukasa Hojo's overall success and popularity, but it's an important hit from Jump's early 80s that brought some femininity and class to the magazine. Black Angels by Shinji Hiramatsu is another successful series of 1981, lasting 179 chapters and 20 volumes. It follows an organization known as the Black Angels as they dole out revenge by assassinating evildoers. Yoji Yukito is our main character, and while he usually seems like a nice but meek young boy, when he needs to kill someone he becomes a ruthless assassin, using his bike as his main killing tool by taking out one of the spokes to use as a needle. The assassinations always involve someone being stabbed in the head and the words, "A black angel descends, go to hell," being said. It's pretty edgy, but it's quite enjoyable to read. Black Angels is a bit weird for me though, as the focus of the main character isn't to save people, but to take revenge and assassinate them. A lot of heavy stuff happens in the manga as well, including a lot of murder, assaults, tons of different crimes, some to children even, and also a ton of rape. It's gratuitous and not really necessary, but if you like edgy violent manga, then you might like this. I just find that it's not a very good fit for Jump. Jump isn't usually hyper-violent like this, and the hero in this instance isn't very heroic because they don't even save anyone. The bad things still happen to people, they still die and stuff. He just kills the person who killed them in a really edgy way. I definitely understand the appeal of that, but it isn't very Jump-like, which makes this a very weird manga in my opinion. The manga would gradually shift out of a more episodic format from the beginning, as Yukito gradually gathers new Black Angel members and we learn more about their organization and some backstory. The main villains of this portion of the story are revealed as well, being a rival assassination group called the Dragon Rang Syndicate. From what I read, it begins to veer into Battle Shonen territory, where the Black Angels have to fight various assassins with all sorts of different abilities, but over time other events in the story happen too. Like about halfway through, there's a great earthquake which ravages Japan, transforming the story into something closer to Fist of the North Star. This is kind of interesting because Black Angels and this event actually predate Fist of the North Star by several months. It seems like Jump was just destined for some sort of post-apocalypse violence. The story would then continue past this point as well for a few more years in this new setting, and more arcs would happen until the finale where Yukito goes on to fight the final enemy called the White Angel. It's a series I might revisit and read more of in the future, as I've only read 8 volumes of it myself, and it does have an official translation that was available on something called Manga Reborn before it was shut down, but you can still find the officially translated manga on Amazon Kindle for a decent price, and perhaps it's at other places as well. Black Angels also received 3 live-action movie adaptations, all between the years 2011 and 2012. They look kind of low budget though, but might be some kind of fun, schlocky Japanese movie, but it at least shows that it had some long-lasting popularity over the years. Commanda Zero by Jun Tomizawa was a sci-fi police action series that lasted 2 volumes and 15 chapters. It features Rita Hagane, usually a clumsy detective who becomes Commanda Zero when the need arises, a super soldier with a reinforced suit who battles an organization called Phoenix who are comprised of modified humans and monsters. Hagane would lead a dual life fighting monsters as Captain Zero, while also being his usual detective self. Despite its fun premise and cool art, it didn't last very long though. And to finish things off, I've saved the best for last, Hisashi Eguchi's other manga of 1981, Stop Hibari-Kun. Hibari ran for a total of 4 volumes and had 61 chapters, serializing rather irregularly as Eguchi took a lot of breaks, leading to the manga ending in late 1983. The story would follow Kosaku Sakamoto, a boy who goes to live with the Ozora family after the passing of his mother. The family being a Yakuza clan and the father of the clan loving Kosaku's mother, so he decides to adopt him essentially. There, Kosaku meets the 4 daughters of the family, the second eldest being the titular Hibari. This is where things get really cool though, because Hibari is a trans girl. While some of the family members don't support her decision, she clearly wants to be referred to as a girl, and her older and younger sister support that. Being from the early 80s, you might think that the representation on offer wouldn't be the greatest, especially since this is a comedy manga, but the manga treats Hibari really respectfully for the most part. Anyone who goes against Hibari's choice is usually portrayed as foolish or antagonistic, and the majority of the characters in the manga adore Hibari. Some want to be with Hibari, go out with her, be her friend, or even just be like Hibari. She's cool, fashionable, funny, cute, and can pack a punch when she needs to. The majority of jokes as well aren't at her expense, but usually at others, and admittedly it's not perfect and does have some duds or gets weird surrounding her gender, but for a manga from the early 80s, I think it handles it really well. It's got a good balance of humor and romance, which I found mostly funny on the joke side, aside from a few bad jokes, some of which were casually racist, which you'll see from time to time in manga from the 80s. They're not great and I wish they weren't there, but they are. The romance line is also interesting as well, because you see Kosaku gradually fall in love with Hibari and she ends up liking him too. He's not perfect and constantly questions and misgenders her, but I think by the end he does warm up to Hibari a lot more, which is nice. Eguchi's artistic talent is on full display here as well. I love how he subtly draws Hibari. The majority of the manga is drawn in a comedic gag manga style like you'd see in his previous works Susume Pirates, but when Hibari needs to be drawn, she's got a cuteness and a beauty to her design. Like Eguchi paid careful attention to make sure he drew her just right. The cover page drawings are also beautiful at times, creative, fashionable, and stylish, which is something Eguchi is known for, and I love how different the new and old covers are. They're really poppy and colourful and fun. Eguchi's drawn Hibari a lot over the years as well, and she just never fails to look cool. Sadly, Eguchi had a lot of problems while working on Hibari. The weekly manga grind was too much for him, and likely that's what caused a lot of his hiatuses. This culminates in a lot of jokes featuring him in the manga complaining about deadlines, which is funny sometimes but does get in the way of why you're really reading the manga, and that's for Hibari. Eventually this all came to a head when the manga abruptly ended due to Eguchi failing to meet deadlines. The final chapter was redone though and is absolutely amazing. I wish there was more Hibari, but it introduces a new character called Gekijiro who acts as a parody of Hiroshi Motomiya's works and old school Shonen Jump boys manga. The twist though is that despite him spouting about manliness and how boys manga is dead, he's actually a trans man. I didn't find it malicious in any way, and I really appreciate the nods to Motomiya and Jump's past. It's really cool representation to see both a trans girl and trans man in the manga though. It's also a really effective meta-commentary in a weird way, because Jump at the time was becoming more effeminate. Works like Dr.Slump had female main characters in Aurelie who would be all over Jump's covers. The same can be said for the newly introduced Cat's Eye and all those female characters. Captain Subasa, as I mentioned previously, also brought in more female readership to the magazine, and Hibari was another rom-com with a female lead that played with gender norms and ideals. Jump at this time would be softer and more varied, filled with gag manga, sports series, and romance, and we'd see a lot more in the following couple years too. Hibari becoming especially popular, getting back-to-back covers at times, which rarely happens and is only reserved for Jump's biggest hits like One Piece. Analyzing this period of Jump's history has been especially fulfilling to me. I love how different the magazine was, and it's not what you'd expect from Jump classically. There's a lack of battle manga, and while some edge does exist, it's heavily outweighed by the friendlier and prettier series that filled the magazine. Hibari exemplifies this for me, it being a manga I'd never have imagined being in Shonen Jump, but after reading it, I can honestly say it's one of my favourite Jump titles of all time, despite all of its missteps. It's honestly great, and you can fully read it as it's been fan translated. It also has a 35 episode long anime that began in 1983, and if you'd like to hear more about that and Hibari in general, please watch Pyramid Inu's video on the subject. It's one I really enjoyed and I love their discussion on Hibari. Similarly, friend of the channel Manga Crash has a Hibari video of their own, which is also worth a watch. I'll leave a link to both in the description. And with that, 1981 comes to an end. It was a pretty packed but fun year with 4 total manga fully translated, those being Captain Subasa, Cat's Eye, Black Angels, and Stop Hibari-Kun, all of which I think are worth reading if they sound appealing to you. They also all did very well in Jump, succeeding in different directions and likely brought in all sorts of new readers and successes to the magazine. This decade is off to a brilliant start, and we've barely scratched the surface of influential manga that make up this decade. I hope you've enjoyed the video and learnt something new about Jump. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future History of Jump videos, and check out the channel for more Shonen Jump related projects, like my Axe File series where I go over more recently axed, cancelled manga. As always, thank you for watching, remember to be kind to each other, and take care.